Well, here we are, folks. Another Tuesday evening. Great to have you on. And we'll put the pre-show on. A few people asked, why do I start the show half an hour early? Well, the answer is because people like coming on and just having a bit of a chat and raising a few issues and all those things. So I've been watching what's been going on and making a few comments. And good to see all the different little sort of threads there. The one on superannuation. There's one about how great is Brisbane or not, which I'm sure Meighan will have a view on as I bring her in a moment or two. And we'll also talk about what's happened to home prices. They're going up, going down, sideways. How do you tell? Do averages mean much? And all those sorts of questions as well. Before I do that, of course, we have to just visit the doggies. There they go. They're sound asleep now. I took them out earlier on. It was raining. I didn't like it much, but they've come back and they're now just zonked out, so they'll be there for the duration. So that's good. I'll keep them quiet unless if it starts thundering, then, we may hear from them. Otherwise, it should be quite quiet. Anyway, without further ado, let me take that off. I'm going to run the intro. I'll be back with the main show in just a moment. Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 21st of February 2023. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics here. Great to have you on. And we're going to talk specifically about Brisbane and Queensland property tonight. Got one of the outstanding experts to join us on the show, Meighan, shortly, and that'll be a really interesting conversation. Before I just bring her in, I will just remind you, as always, we don't give specific financial, legal or property advice. This is general chat. Do please play nice in the chat room. We do moderate the stream. 21st of Feb 23 is the date if you're watching in replay. If you'd like to ask a question, then use @WalkTheWorld. That'll make sure that I see the question and it gets into my question queue. And if you'd like to make a contribution to what we do here, you can get your questions top of the list by using Super Chat, or indeed just making a contribution, again, using Super Chat. They're greatly appreciated and just help to cover some of the costs of what we do here. With no further commentary beforehand, let me bring Meighan now in. Meighan, hello.
Good evening.
I'm very good. How are you going?
It's awesome up here in Brisbane, actually. The weather was a little bit cooler today. God, it's been hot.
Yeah, we've had some really, really weird weather here with huge humidity.
Yeah.
It's like sort of drip, drip, drip. You go out and 5 seconds later you think, oh dear.
You know what we've really missed this year is in Brisbane normally, and particularly, we're a bit less than subtropical, but normally we have these really scorching days and amazing storms in the evening to cool everything down. And we just haven't been having the storms. So it's almost like we've got heat on heat on heat on heat, and everything's just, the flowers are wilting and the plants are screaming out for some water and we're just running our air conditioning non-stop. I'm renting at the moment. I've only got 2 air conditioners in the house, and I know it sounds a bit whiny, but oh my God, it's hard. It's hot.
First world problem.
It is a first world problem. My poor children.
Well, I've got a bit of a dilemma here because my main studio room also contains my grand piano, right? And my grand piano doesn't like the air conditioning. It goes out of tune. So I have to make a decision.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Because basically you take the humidity out when you put your air conditioner on, right? Drop the temperature, but you take the humidity out. Yeah. And when you lower the humidity, the piano sort of just... and so it all goes out of tune. So I have to decide whether I actually get hot and sweaty and play my piano in tune, or whether I actually cool down.
What's the decision, Martin? Yeah. What have you decided?
Well, so far I've erred on the side of hot and sweaty, so I apologise for that.
I learnt 2 things out of that conversation. One, you play a grand piano, and 2, that they go out of tune when the air conditioning's on. There you go. Look, I'm full of knowledge tonight.
Well, we are just full of lots of different information. I
hope I can help people with Brisbane.
Yeah. Well, I'll just show you this because I can. There you go. That's the grand piano there.
Oh, stunning! What a beautiful piece of
furniture. It's a work of art as well as the piano. So it's my pride and joy.
I like your book collection in the background too.
Yeah. I have a few books there, and frankly, with that and the 2 dogs,
What else is in there? Do you get the corner?
There ain't much room. Now, talking about chaos and confusion, property chaos and confusion. Right? What on earth is going on? I mean,
who knows?
Does anybody know? I mean, because the CoreLogic came out and said Brisbane property prices are falling more than Sydney the last month. Other people are saying property prices are rising, and when you look around, you sort of say, well, there's all sorts of different things going on. What's your take on what's really going on in and around Brisbane at the moment?
It's a funny sort of market, to be honest, and really, there are a certain set of things that we can usually follow, and they're loosely built on economic principles of supply and demand. But it's almost like we're kind of having to throw the basics of those traditional property analysis type tools out the window, because the X factor, which is often it's talked about in property markets, the X factor, whether it was the GFC or whatever the case that was, in recent years it was COVID. We've got so many X factors going on at the moment that people almost...
Oh. You've stopped. Why have you stopped? Your audio just stopped. That's interesting. Can't hear you. You dropped out. And I can see you, but your audio is gone. Hang on a moment, folks. We'll just try and sort things out.
What about now?
Yep, it's come back.
Okay. You know what I reckon it is? I reckon it's those children on YouTube.
Yeah, don't you just hate that?
If that happens again, I'll just duck away and get them onto a different network.
Well, it's interesting that the audio went down, because normally what happens is the audio stays and the picture goes.
And the picture goes.
Yeah, but no, I could see you, you're perfect, but no audio. So.
The mouth was moving, but there was nothing coming out. Is that like when the lights are on but nobody's home?
I think it's a great illustration of the problem with the property market at the moment.
So where did you lose me?
Well,
Do you want me to go back to the start?
You pretty much said it's pretty crazy, and and some of the assumptions maybe are different.
Funny and weird, and those basic economic factors that we can often usually turn to in as people in the property market. Remember, I'm not a stats person. I am hands up, not the stats person. I'm the people on the ground, the feet on the ground person. I'm the person who looks at what is the human behaviour side of the property market. How are people reacting to what's going on at the moment? How are they behaving? That's the space that I work in. And with the feet on the ground, I can observe that at a fairly close level. But, in Brisbane, we had that peak in activity around sort of April 2022. And that's when I asked a large group, a group that's got about 100 agents in their office that work across Brisbane, what their numbers had been like, because I thought that would give me a reasonably good idea of what I was seeing anecdotally in the marketplace. And around the peak of the market, they were seeing about 800 to 1,000 groups through open houses every weekend. So that's a lot of people for that group. So there was a real peak in activity. The prices then peaked around June 2022, if we look at the median house price reporting. But the agents then told us, and we saw this on the ground, that as interest rates started to sort of increase towards the end of last year, and it was, we were starting to see a bit of a pinch and a bit of a pattern of those interest rates going up, buyer numbers dropped down to about 500 per weekend. So they almost halved in about a 6-month period. Now, it's been a funny start to this year again, because numbers are way back up. So they're back up to around, for this group of 100 agents, they're back up to about 800 to 1,000 groups through their open houses. So talking about 100 agents, they've got 800 to 1,000 groups going through their open houses each week. But these aren't actually sort of translating to transactions. So this is the odd thing. There is a real lack of supply in the Brisbane market. When I talk about Brisbane, I'm talking about the Brisbane LGA, not the greater Brisbane market. There's a real lack of supply, and particularly good quality properties available in family size homes. But no one's sort of taking the step to purchase what is actually out there. And we were sort of tossing that around in our buyers agency. My business partner, Nathan, and I were going, what do you think's sitting behind this? What's going on? What are people thinking? And I think that's, it's people are being particularly picky because they don't want to get caught with a B or a C grade property in a market that they perceive may be falling. But there's a lot of curiosity. People really want to be active, but they're not going to do anything. They're going to sit on their hands until they know what interest rates are going to do and that there's going to be an end to the increases. So what that's kind of translating to from the agent side of things is while people are holding back, if they do make an offer, we've seen longer conditional periods come back in. So in Queensland, most properties are sold by private treaty and often people make a conditional offer. So it might be subject to finance approval, perhaps building pest inspection. There's a whole plethora of conditions that someone might offer. But during COVID, during that real FOMO peaking racing period, people were making unconditional offers and just throwing money at whatever they had to pay, that's what they'd pay. And they weren't worrying about doing an appropriate amount of due diligence on the properties. They just wanted to buy so they didn't miss out. So we have that massive turnaround now where people are back to making conditional offers. And we heard of one the other day where somebody actually got a subject to sale condition accepted on a contract. And we haven't seen those for 2 years. Sellers just have not had to accept things like that. So we're seeing longer contract conditions and conditional periods, longer to actually get a contract on a property up here. And certainly we're seeing like multi-level markets across different property types, let alone different suburbs.
Yeah, very interesting. So there is a lot of diversity, right?
Huge amount of diversity.
A lot of
there's
demand.
A huge amount of sitting back and going, like, huge amount of demand.
Yeah.
Demand's still there.
Yeah.
Just people aren't confident to do anything about it.
And I'm seeing that in some of my surveys too. So the interest in looking at property is still there, but jumping over and saying, right, I'm going to make a commit. That's a harder step now. And part of that is, I think, the borrowing power problem. So there are a few people that I'm seeing who now can't borrow what they could have borrowed previously.
Yes.
Which means they can't reach for what they wanted to buy previously. First-time buyers, but not just first-time buyers. The borrowing power problem is, I don't know whether you're seeing it, but in some cases, 30% or more down now from where it was at the peak in terms of ability to borrow.
I'll give you a real example, and this is a first-time buyer. So back in February 2022, yep. So we're talking about a year ago. This particular person with $300,000 deposit, so that was their deposit and costs, they were able to borrow $1,050,000. That was what their borrowing capacity was with through a broker. So they're looking at all sorts of different banks. In November 2022, they were ready to move forward with a purchase. Went back to the bank. Obviously, it took them a long time to find. They weren't using buyer's agent. They were doing it on their own, and their borrowing capacity had decreased to $649,000.
Wow, ouch!
It is now just over $500,000.
Yeah.
So that's a real example of a 50% reduction with the same deposit, with the same cash. And deposit and borrowing costs. So this, of course, means that the LVR will be a lot lower and repayments will be lower, but prices haven't dropped at the same pace as interest rates have risen and borrowing capacity has decreased. So that's a real conundrum for first-time buyers, any home buyer actually. If your borrowing capacity decreases at a faster rate than the prices are decreasing, then your ability to purchase what you thought you could buy decreases, obviously, and you have to adjust your expectations. So your 3 Ps, your position, property, price. Price is dropping, you need to adjust property or position. And that's hard when you're in a process of trying to find something, whether it's a family home or your first home.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think that borrowing power story really just underscore what I've seen again and again and again in my surveys and indeed in my one-to-one conversations. So people are shocked by how little they can go for now, right?
Yeah, so when you're talking to people about that, I'm interested. Sorry, I'm not meaning to interview you, but
no, carry on.
Tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing there, because that's a real example that I've seen. I've heard it anecdotally. I reckon if I went back to the bank, probably my borrowing capacity would be significantly impacted as well. I'm not ready to do that right now because I'm mid renovation. But what are you hearing when you talk to people?
So there's two factors to bear in mind. Of course, the borrowing power is the 3% problem, right? So basically it's 3% above the current mortgage rate. So as rates go up, the 3% goes up as well, right? Now, a few people are saying, well, maybe APRA will change their minds and maybe they'll go to 7%. So that might give a little bit of a wobble, right? So, but that 3% buffer is a really big issue now, because the typical mortgage rate for a lot of people are now well above 5%. So they're actually being assessed at 8%, right?
I haven't seen 8% since.
So that's their borrowing capacity.
Yeah,
right?
Assessment rate. But I'm just trying to think the last time I saw 8%, what prices were doing then? Because significantly lower.
Long time ago.
Yeah. I think my first property might have been around 8 or 9% in about 98.
Yeah, so remember that what they're doing is the banks are assessing the capacity to repay, not on the mortgage rate, but mortgage rate plus 3, right? So that's the first bit of maths. The second bit of maths relates to the affordability based on cash flow. In other words, how much money have you got to spend, right? Because the ratios that the banks use, they basically have this sort of ABS-driven, Melbourne Institute-driven HEM model, right? And that model is driven by the inputs relating to the cost of things. Now, we know that costs have gone up dramatically, right? So we've got these two forces working on the affordability, right? The 3% buffer on the interest rate plus the HEM. Those two things together combined, in some cases, have put people into a situation where their borrowing power is down 30 to 50%. So
amazing, isn't it?
Then the question is, well, so what do we do? And so, do I look further out? Maybe it's a little cheaper, but actually it's not that much cheaper. Do I wait on the expectation that maybe property prices will continue to drift lower? And then people say, well, hang on, but don't forget you've got all this migration coming in. Maybe we'll see the government do stuff, more first home grants or homeowner grants, those sorts of things. So there's that sort of question, or are we actually completely out of it, in which case do we rent? But then trying to rent at the moment is almost impossible because rents are going up, not coming down, right? So what you're seeing, a lot of people are trapped because whatever they do, whichever way they turn, they've got these roadblocks. And it's that sense of complete desperation that I'm getting from a lot of my conversation at the moment, right? There is no clear way out. Right? Now, okay, some people can say, well, I can still tap my parents, except the parents are now seeing their property prices easing back. And so there's a little bit less willingness to use the bank of mum and dad than previously.
And not everyone has the bank of mum and dad.
That is true too.
Be honest.
That is true too.
Yeah.
And you've also got other people who are wanting to upsize and upscale, and suddenly they find that their capacity to upscale is also now reduced as well. So you've got all these tensions below the waterline, driven by the change in economic conditions. And I suspect that's one of the reasons why we've got this really weird market going on at the moment, right, where nobody's quite sure. I don't know how you work out what fair value is anymore. It's really tough, right?
It is really tough. And I just want to pick up on a really important point you made there, and that's around that demand side of things. So, in Brisbane, we've got the Olympics coming up in 2032. And not only have we already had a large amount of net migration from people coming during COVID, from interstate, both Sydney and Melbourne in particular, coming up to the southeast Queensland corner, we've had a lot of repatriation of expats who had been living and working overseas and for a great number of reasons have actually repatriated back to their homes in Brisbane. So properties that they may have bought and had in the rental pool, they've now taken those back as principal place of residence. So we've already had this great number of influx of people into the southeast Queensland corner. We are sitting at about just under 2.5 million. in Brisbane in terms of population, and that is expected to tip over 3 million by the time the Olympics come around. And there's a large number of external factors that are going to impact that, and that is more expats coming home. We have had an absence of international students, and we do have a strong international student pool in Queensland. We have some excellent universities that international students come and reside, so they take up a large part of the available rentals. We've also got skilled migrants who we haven't been receiving into the country for some time that will start to come back into the country, that will take up and be looking for somewhere to live. At the same time, we're hearing that household structure is changing. So you used to sit at about 2.6 people per household. It's now down to about 1.8 people per household. And one of the impacting factors of that has been COVID and people's desire not to live with each other anymore. So an increase in divorce rates. So myself, I went from one household to two households through divorce. So there you've just doubled the number of people or houses that are needed for one family. So that increase in divorce rate, and also the decrease in house share situations, because people have went, I just don't want to live with you anymore. Can we just be friends and not actually have to cohabitate in the way that we have? So the number of people residing in dwellings has actually decreased. So that's soaking up a lot of supply, a lot of, increasing a lot of demand. But supply-wise, during COVID, the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, PIPA, did a survey and found that about 30% of private investors sold their properties during COVID. Just let that sink in.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because
massive. Because 96% of rentals are supplied by private investors.
Right. Yeah. So about 20% of rental properties have disappeared out of the market over the last couple of years, right?
Yeah.
3 reasons. One is, in some cases, it's because of tighter regulation would have required significant investment by the investor to bring it up to a standard that it could be relet.
In some states, the change in rental tenancy laws.
So that includes things like smoke alarms and other stuff. The second is that the gross and net income calculations started going really bad. So, in fact, if you look at it in terms of not gross but net returns, in other words, particularly as interest rates are rising, people couldn't make it work. And thirdly, there was no capital appreciation because we had a big run-up, but then it sort of stopped, and now it's sort of going sideways or down. So those factors have actually driven a lot of property investors out of the market. And that's one of the reasons why the supply side is so messed up at the moment.
Absolutely. And if you think during COVID, people were in financial distress, both tenants and landlords. And, as a manager, we managed about 300 properties at the time. And out of those, we had about 12% that were on rental abatement or reductions. So for those landlords, they had a decrease in the rent that they were receiving at the same time where their income may have been affected. And to them, there wasn't much of a rosy outlook, because early in COVID, there was nothing that told us that prices were going to skyrocket in the way that they did. I think you'd be kidding yourself if you really thought that you knew that was going to happen. But what it meant was investors were looking at it going, I either need to sell that investment property or I need to sell my home to keep my head above water. So that was before things sort of took off, and there wasn't growth, looking like there was going to be growth. And whilst you might say, well, the banks gave some leave to people to not pay things for a while, you still had to pay it. It just was deferred for a little while. But some of the rental abatements weren't deferrals. They're actually just reductions. And, hats off to some of those landlords that could absorb those reductions and help tenants through that process. So what we saw was a really big decrease in some cases, particularly properties that were available for rent during that downturn period and during lockdowns. Those rents actually reduced on fixed term leases for a period that could be as long as a year. So then when those properties became available as rents were starting to pick up again and demand was really high and supply was really low, that's where we're probably seeing a little bit of, people saying, wow, my rent went up $300 a week. Well, it might have gone down $200 a week 18 months ago to go back up to $50 a week or $100 a week more than what it was back then. So there's this, we've got a little bit of looking forward to see how the rental market actually would have looked if it didn't have COVID in the middle of it. What would the normal growth rates have been? But I think the biggest thing is that loss of private landlords who are providing the supply of houses, and that's gone back into the principal place of residence pool, and owner-occupiers have bought those properties. How do we get them back?
Well, it's a good question. And, of course, the discussion still is, are investors actually too supported by tax breaks and all of those things, right? But we have got a property market, particularly a rental sector market, that's completely reliant on those investors providing supply.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's and so I don't know whether it's the same in Brisbane, but down here in Sydney, we've now got large organisations building custom property just
rent to buy
for rent to buy.
Build to rent.
Build to rent, exactly. Yeah. But if you look carefully, the economics of that's quite different. So you end up actually quite often having to pay quite a lot more for those, and because they need a different type of return as well. So I'm not sure that's a really good solution. I'm pretty sceptical personally of that particular model of accommodation. So there's
a few that are in the wings for Brisbane, and they're more some of the bigger institution or private developers who are doing the build to rent properties where they will keep them and manage them themselves and just have them purely as rentals. It'll be really interesting to see, and I haven't wrapped my head around this, but it'll be really interesting to see what impact that has on prices in the area, because of course they're not going to sell. So are they just forever held, until they're a bit old and need to be knocked down and rebuilt? Like, do you know what I mean? Like they're forever a rental property, but they're not public housing. So they'll have a shelf life. Yeah,
they will, and they might have a ghetto life as well. So
and that's the concern.
So I was talking to somebody over in the US who's been running this for a little while, and they went into it boots and all. But 5 years down the track, the quality of the tenants in those areas has actually gone down, and the rent they're able to demand went down because basically it created a bit of a ghetto. So this is not without its risks in my mind.
Couldn't agree more. Yep. Now, I've got a supply here. I wanted to look at the other side of supply when it comes to rentals. So, all right, at the moment, okay, so let's look at vacancy rate. So vacancy rate is just essentially the percentage of properties that are available to rent compared to the overall market as an estimate at any point in time. And 2.5% vacancy rate is considered to be sort of balanced by the experts. So at the moment, in Brisbane, houses, so the rent that you would pay for a house is up about 17%, and vacancy rate is sitting at about 0.8%. So when you look at supply, that screams, holy shit, we've got a real problem here, and we've got more people coming. Units are up by about 13%. That's the first time in a number of years that we've seen unit growth, because what this has done is, because there aren't houses and townhouses available to rent or to buy, and they're traditionally the types of properties that Brisbaneites like to frequent. We're not particularly into the unit lifestyle, particularly, the smaller 2-bedroom units. But this is the first time that we've seen rents actually increase. And so they're up by 13%, and vacancy is sitting at 0.7%. That means that all of that extra supply that has been sitting and languishing in the Brisbane market from the overdevelopment has now been absorbed. And there isn't that extra supply of units that we used to talk about. Now, what that might mean in terms of prices and in terms of sale prices, I'll be interested to see how that sort of plays out. But at the moment, people just can't get anywhere. They're looking for anything. And that's a bit of a concern. There's about couple of other numbers, a really interesting one. A company called Propertyology, I saw a post that they did the other day, and they made a comparison between the amount of rentals that were available in January 2018. There was about 11,500 available for rent in terms of advertised properties for rent. In January 2023, that was down to 2,800. In January, and January is the peak rental period in Brisbane. So it's the period where most properties turn over, because that's when people are moving around, settling before school, students are coming in and so forth. So that's gone from, that's just available for rent, 11,500 in 2018 to 2,800 in 2023, about 75% decrease.
Yeah. Astonishing numbers.
And we've gone up in population.
Yeah, and there's more coming, right?
There's more coming.
Yeah, you have to say the government's big Australia policy is clearly going to have a huge negative impact on the property sector in pretty much every major area. Brisbane, not the least. Yeah, it is concerning, and unfortunately, of course, there's a very little joined up thinking, right? So you have little initiatives in different areas to try and solve a little bit of it, but nobody really wants to take the holistic view here and try and put all the pieces together.
And look, let's not have a political conversation, because I won't. But the difficulty is, and I'm going to put it back on us as individuals, is we want this immediacy of action. And we want it done now, and we want it, but the problem is that most of these things take a 20 to 50 year strategic planning requirement and budgeting that needs to be, consistent and stuck to. When we go through this cycle of popularity posts and polls and elections and everyone wants somebody to do something now.
Yep.
It changes the strategic nature of what we need to plan for in the long term. And that is, I think, the thing that is causing the greatest difficulty when it comes. You just can't build these things in a year. You can't even build them in 3 years. So you have to have this agreement that if this is put in place, do you know what, everyone, we've got to stick to the plan. Otherwise, we're going to be where we are now in 10 years' time, because we haven't been able to do this long-term planning.
No, I agree, and of course the most recent announcement about the 10 billion, right, sounds good until you actually realise that actually they're going to invest that money, and the cash flow coming off that will actually then go to build stuff. So you've actually got a long, thin strategy, right? It's going to take a long time, and it's good to have a long time view, but you've got to be actually thinking a little bit, I think, of a larger cycle than that. But
we've got to think of a longer cycle.
Yeah, but the election cycle gets in the way all the time, and then people need to see action quickly. So we see little sort of knee-jerk reactions and trying to fix without wanting to really fix the big issues. And that really is, for me, the sorry story of property in Australia the last 20 odd years, because I've been saying for a long, long time, this debt bomb is going to go off at some point. Well, it looks as though we're getting close to it now, right? And I know people accuse me of doom and gloom and everything else, but I've been through these cycles before. I've seen the 20 to 30% drop in real values of properties, and I've seen what happens. And I was really worried that we were being boxed in. Politicians didn't want to hear it. The RBA didn't want to hear it. So unfortunately, you see tactical solutions, short-term tactical solutions that don't necessarily get us to where we need to get to. There has to be joined-up thinking, but it's tough to get it to work.
It is, because we demand immediacy.
Absolutely.
We as individuals, as a nation, the thing that frustrates me sometimes is this, what are you going to change mentality? Well, sometimes you can't change it. You actually just have to stay the course. And staying the course is harder than coming up with a short-term Band-Aid that feels really popular but actually doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, so you just basically steal a bit more money out of taxpayers and throw it into something else, right? And say, well, I've done something. And then move on to the next one. I mean, look at Home Builder and how that wrecked the building and construction sector, and how it blew property prices up dramatically.
Home Builder, some of the first-time buyer incentives. I'm an absolute champion for first-time buyers, and Veronica Morgan and I have, we've really put our heart and souls into educating first-time buyers so that they don't make silly mistakes and they make intelligent decisions. But some of those first home buyer grants, they weren't about first home buyers and getting them into the property market. They are about stimulating the economy.
Yep,
they're about stimulating the building industry.
Yep.
But overstimulation of an undersupplied or under-resourced industry has just had detrimental effects on it. And the flow on isn't just about, there's a question in the chat earlier around the building industry. I don't know if you can find it really quickly, but it was one of the early questions. My thoughts on the building industry. And the thing that is, I think, really quite troubling for the building industry, and I'm renovating at the moment, so I'm right in the middle of it. I'm halfway through a 9-month renovation, so I'm seeing it on the ground, but I'm hearing it from the builders and the subbies themselves as I go around to different properties and different places. Is that there is not only a difficulty on the supply side of things, so prices going up and difficult to get supplies and building materials and so forth, and concrete. I'll tell you what, the hardest thing to get in Brisbane at the moment is Pebble Creek for a pool. They're about 9 months behind. So they're the bottleneck in the pool building industry at the moment, and everyone wanted a pool post-COVID because why not? But from the building industry point of view, not only is it hard for builders if they take on pieces of work and they have overlapping pieces of work, then their cash flow can be really quite challenged, particularly if they're needing to order materials at similar times for multiple jobs. So builders that take on more than one job have actually found themselves in a cash flow crisis. And they might have had the work in the pipeline, they might have had the signed up contracts, but you can't trade insolvent. And this is what some of these builders have found themselves in a position of. They've taken on too much work, they have too much to pay other people, and they just can't cover their cash flow. Now, I'm not talking just about the big players. Some of the smaller builders that might only do maybe 5 or 10 a year are experiencing similar type things because their costs are going up, their margins being squeezed. But it's also a people problem as well, because we haven't got this influx of migrant workers that sometimes fill some of those labour type jobs. Yep. So, the labourers assistants and so forth, they're not out there at the moment. So builders actually can't get the labour to support their activities to complete the jobs that they've got underway at the moment, which is pushing out their timeframes and sometimes lead to penalties under their contracts if they have penalty, if they go over their completion date. So it is a real problem. But the flow-on effect to the property market then is it's actually created some really clear distinctions in people's minds between renovated and unrenovated properties. So if we go back to pre-COVID, people were, quite happy to pay a reasonable price for a renovator in a good area that had good bones and so forth, or they might be quite happy to pay for a completed home. And you could sort of see some comparability between the price of the renovator and how much it would cost to renovate it and what the finished product was being sold for. So, it kind of roughly added up to a degree. And then we went through COVID, and prices of renovators or properties that could be knocked down, because there are many properties in Brisbane that can't be knocked down. So suddenly there was an increase in interest in properties that could be knocked down to build new houses. They just absolutely blew out. Places that really should have only sold for land value, let's say, there's a particular case study that I did in Wavell Heights, which is about 10 kilometres north of the CBD, character area, but you can knock houses down in that area. But all pretty low density, so not a lot of units and townhouses, elevated, nice breezes, close to infrastructure, big shopping centre in the suburb next door. So, pretty good from a fundamentals point of view. So places that were selling for 600,000 to 700,000 as a knockdown on about 600 square metres, they pushed out to 1.4 million people were paying for a house that they could knock down and then spend what they thought was maybe 1.2 on the renovation. Some of those people that bought during that heady period are now looking at a build cost that's pushed out to about $2 million. So they're now looking at maybe 3.4 million just on their purchase and build on a property that probably the suburb record in Wavell Heights was just achieved this weekend for $3.1 million. And that was a pretty special house. So if that's your record, then your average home that you're building on a 600 square metre block of land is probably going to be sub that. So build plus construction, purchase of land plus construction, now well exceeding end value for those people that bought during that heady period. Those prices have now come back to just under $1 million for those types of properties. So they're the ones that have been had the biggest impact, is places that people thought they'd just knock down and build because, there were houses advertised, we can build a house on your block of land for this, and suddenly you couldn't do it. But they're actually now the opportunity properties that are coming back onto the market because people can't get a builder, they can't do the build anymore, and they're now divesting of those properties and getting out at sometimes at a loss of maybe 10 or 12%, and that's opportunity for some people if they're prepared to take that sort of thing on, but it's really bloody hard on the people that got in and paid what they thought they needed to pay at the time. But because of the change in the construction costs and the availability of builders, they just can't do it anymore. It's not feasible.
Oh, I think that's a very important point. And it's fascinating. I was talking to somebody the other day who committed to a build with a builder. And it was basically a contract that said, well, this is roughly what it's going to be, but there are a few exclusions, exceptions, and suddenly it's gone up by 20%, right? And so they're now in the situation. So
were they PC costs, or were they were just excluded and they were going to source the pricing for them externally?
So basically, it said, we've got this amount for materials, but if materials go this out, then we'll have to charge. So there was an uplift in materials, an uplift in labour costs, and in both threshold categories, they then crossed the Rubicon, as it were, and suddenly the price has gone up. And it's gone up by about 20%. Now, they can't afford now to complete the construction because they can't get the loan because the valuation hasn't gone up, despite the fact that...
And maybe their borrowing capacity could have been affected.
Well, I was going to say precisely that. So the borrowing capacity has gone in one way, the cost of the finishing construction has gone the other way. So they're now in the horrendous situation where they're going to try and sell a half-finished property, right? Because they cannot see a way to complete it. And they will be significantly out of pocket, right? And so it's partly a timing thing, it's partly, interest rate thing, but everything has worked against them. And I'm seeing that, that's just not one-off. I'm seeing it quite consistently now, where there are patterns of people who are getting close to saying, I've got to pull the pin somewhere. I've got to find a way out of this because there's no way that I can let this go. And then you talk to builders, they'll say, well, we've had a profitless boom. So we've been chasing our tails, running around in circles for the last 18 months to 2 years. We're not making anything on doing any of these, right? So my conclusion is that the government intervention that we saw, which was way too much and completely thrown in the wrong areas, have created these tidal waves that are now spilling over. And it's hitting those people who are trying to actually, build, and it's hitting the builders. And it's also highlighting that if there's a property that's in good nick and you don't actually need to do much to move in, you can move in straight away, that can command a premium.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think, an important message at the moment, because it seems to me that you've got to separate out the sort of the construction cycle and, new build, etc., from the existing property that's ready to move into. You might want to make a few changes later, but you can move straight in. It's not imperative to do it. Those ones are the ones that actually seem to me to be actually of really significant interest from prospective purchasers who don't want to get caught in this risk cycle that we're talking about.
You're spot on, and you've absolutely nailed it. And that is what we're seeing in Brisbane, is those finished family homes in family-oriented areas that haven't got overriding negatives, things like doesn't flood, it's, not at the bottom of a dip, it's not right on a train line, it's not right on commercial, those sorts of properties that have a functional layout, good proportional room sizes, a practicality to them and a level of finish that doesn't necessarily require input from them. They're still commanding premium prices and they are getting multiple offers on them, but people are pickier. So if there is one of those negatives, the floor plan's a little clunky, the bedrooms are a little bit too small, the layout doesn't quite work for the young family or the teenage kids, then they are languishing a little bit. And whereas 18 months ago, something like that with a bit of a negative, people would have just been throwing themselves at, and you would have been beating the buyers as an agent. You would have been beating them off with a stick to say line up, rubbing your hands together if you got a listing like that. But yeah, you've nailed it in that people don't want to take on the risk. They feel like there's enough risk around them in their lives at the moment between interest rates and labour markets and what is happening that is outside their control. That they don't want the risk of, well, what if I buy this property, there's a little bit of a downturn in prices and I have to find a builder and, it could take longer than expected and I've got to move out and pay rent and how am I going to get a rental and, all these sorts of things. It just creates a pressure cooker in people's lives that they want to avoid. And at the moment, those houses are a bit of a valve release. If they can get into them, the borrowing capacity is still there for them, and they can get into those properties at a rate that still looks, money's not, let's face it, 5.5% is not a huge interest rate. It just is compared to what a lot of people went into their loan thinking they were going to pay for a longer period of time. So, we're not talking 18% interest rates
yet.
We're not talking about 9% interest rates. That I was not in the market then, but my parents were. That was tough times. That was 3 jobs territory.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Sort of thing.
But
because prices were a lot lower then too.
Yeah, it's just worth saying, of course, that the actual ratio between income and prices are very different now. So people are actually have a very much more significant mortgage relative to income than they had. So you wouldn't need 18% to have the same effect as back then, right? In terms of real cash flow impact. That's why we're seeing cash flow pressures on people now. But it is really interesting. Now, I asked you to highlight a few interesting postcodes where you thought it might be worth looking in detail at what's gone on, because talking generalities is interesting, but sometimes it doesn't tell you the full thing. So I thought I might walk through a couple of these. So
these areas, and I'll just explain why I chose them.
Yeah,
these areas are sort of planned community type areas. So they're house and land packages that have been released over periods of time. So Springfield Lakes was a master plan community. The first releases, those houses are quite aged now, and there are more tracts of land to be released over time. So they're in that, these are the sorts of areas where I find, and I was interested to see what the data said, but I find these tend to peak during the upward property cycle, and then they fall back down to around the same sort of level as they were previously once the affordability, the attractiveness of the affordability in comparison to, say, a more city location, once that has sort of gone and the FOMO has gone out of the market, these are often places where first owners are attracted to and investors are attracted to. And they tend to have that greater cycle of up and down prices, but longitudinally don't actually grow particularly strongly in comparison to capital cities, established areas.
Yeah, and this is why it's quite interesting. So I actually put up some charts. So this is actually looking at the movement of price, right? So this is median value from 2014 to 23, and you can see here 21, 22, 23, massive rises, you can also look at it in percentage terms. So we 30% rise in a year, right? Ridiculous, really. And then it came back. We're at 10% this year, right? So it's easing, but still very significant. And if you look at units, you can see a similar story. Again, 21, 22, 23, massive up. And we had
But look how much that drops when the interest in the market dissipates.
Absolutely. And this is really interesting. That's why I think it's quite interesting to look at the variation as well, right? So you've seen considerable drops, 10% plus. So this is really quite a volatile area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, volatility and coastal market. I'll talk about coastal markets in the moment.
Yeah.
I couldn't sort of pull out a postcode that I particularly wanted you to look at there, but I want to talk to you about them generically. But if you could overlay the Brisbane local government area median house price onto some of these, not the greater Brisbane median house price, but the local government area for Brisbane, you would see that Brisbane is reasonably steady. It sort of does this, has a little bit of an increase, and then it kind of flattens a little bit. You don't see that up and down nature of house price increase and decrease as you do in these sorts of areas. And I guess that was what I was particularly interested in having a look at, is it kind of steadily increases over time, but, you know, with the exception of about sort of 2011, which was worst sort of flood year, and that credit squeeze around 2015 to 19, that, and the GFC, of course, Brisbane really kind of went through those, apart from the flood, went through those on a pretty steady and even keel. But these areas where there's an attraction because of their affordability during peak times, when that FOMO goes out of the market and the speed and the pace of the market comes back, that's when they have big drops in prices back to a fairly reasonably close level to where they were before. So you're not seeing that steady increase over time.
Absolutely, the up and down, that's the point about this. And it's interesting, I also looked at, this is from SQM, this shows you the listings, right, in that postcode, right? It's quite interesting looking at the growth here of properties that have been on the market for quite some time, right? So in 2022, it was pretty low. So the light blue is the more recent ones. But you can see here that there's a lot.
I can't see that. Can you bring it up?
Oh, sorry.
That's
I pushed the right button. It would help.
There we go.
There you go.
All right, talk me through it again.
Yeah. Okay, so this is from SQM. So this is effectively showing you the over 180 days, 90 to 180, and then the light blue is under 30 days. So this is new listings. Right?
Yep.
And you can see here that in the middle...
Days on market?
Yes.
Yep.
That's right. This is how long it's been on the market. So this is the listings, right? So you can see there's a rise of older properties that have been listed and yet haven't shifted.
Yeah.
And the proportion of new properties coming on, it's actually relatively low, although I think it's probably slightly higher now because this, of course, is a little bit older data now. So that's quite interesting in terms of the story there. And then if you look at my data, this is now for this particular postcode, which basically shows you that the mortgage stress is a little bit there, right? Sure, yeah. Bit of rental stress, but it's not as bad as some areas, right? So whilst there are some people struggling, it's not necessarily as horrendous. And that's because if you look at the disposable income isn't too bad, right? This is the proportion, so 31.7% of monthly disposable income. In some other postcodes around the country, it's up at more than 40%.
So just talk me through that figure. So that is what's
so this is
paid towards the mortgage or the rent, is it?
So that basically says the average disposable monthly income, so this is on average in this postcode, is $6,680 a month. Typical mortgage repayment is 31.7% of that, or $2,000.
Yeah.
Typical rent, $1,894, right? So that's quite an interesting observation. So at the moment, the ratios are high, but not dramatically high. Right? And it's also,
I've seen worse.
Yeah, mostly houses. Now, if we then go to North Lakes, right, slightly different profile. So we had a big run up last year, and then it sort of only moved up slightly over the last 12 months. So that translates from a 30% up, a 30% down, basically.
And look where it's come back down to.
Correct. Funny enough, where it was, right?
Back to where it was.
Which is your point about volatility, right?
And it's the generic nature of the properties that are available there, and the fact that there is more land releases. So that there's no scarcity, there's no uniqueness, and the attractiveness is based on price.
Yeah, and that's really the point, right? And of course, once a property is no longer a new property, you're competing with new property down the road.
Yeah,
which is we discussed before, and then if you look then at the days on market, same sort of story. Same sort of thing here. So you can see here that the listings of older properties that haven't sold really rising. Now, my analysis is here quite a few of those are those old investment properties that nobody really wants, right? So
it's hard to sell. So we're talking about generally 3 or 4 bedroom, low set brick tile kind of houses, not generally the style that is sought after in Brisbane. They don't have the scarcity value, but they're an attractive option for people from interstate as an investment because it feels familiar. It's a housing type that is familiar to interstate investors. But once that stops having its new features, whether that be someone seeking depreciation or this higher rent, and something newer and shinier comes onto the market, there's no buyer pool for it. So there's no broad appeal from a number of buyer pool types, and it kind of reaches its shelf life where price is the only thing that will attract people to it.
And interestingly, quite a few of those properties were bought by people interstate a couple of years ago, right?
And I reckon there'd be a marketing company that was down there pushing them.
Correct, there was.
Let's call them a spruiker.
Exactly.
Let's call them what they are.
They were spruiking, and they didn't necessarily go and visit the property. They, couldn't go interstate at the time, and they were looking at all of the high yields that were being quoted by those very marketing companies who were actually selling out of Brisbane as the place to, 5% returns easy, blah, blah, blah. A lot of them have now given up. Right?
Yeah, and why is there not accountability for that?
Oh, there should be.
If I, as a buyer's agent, had put somebody into something that was fundamentally flawed and poorly researched, and this is a whole nother argument about why in property investment advisory is not or should be regulated, but there's just no accountability for that.
No, there isn't. And I actually think that's a broader issue about property, right? So the property spookers left, right and centre don't actually have any of the same obligations as financial advisors do, for example. And yet the quantum of the investment that's being made is, huge. I mean, it's life-changing. Right?
It's enormous and it's leveraged.
Yeah.
So there are parties involved who have an interest if you can't fulfil your obligations. And that can have far-reaching impact on you. It's not just about losing an investment portfolio. This is a bank who has recourse if you can't pay your loan. You can't just hand your keys back like you could in the US in 2008.
Absolutely. Yeah. No jingle mail here. And just on this North Lakes situation, couple of interesting observations. Monthly disposable income is 34.9% on average. It's a bit higher, but not dramatically so. Rental stress, not too bad, but there's quite a lot of, mortgage stress, not bad. A lot of rental stress, though. So that's part of the problem with rental properties. So you see property stress is quite high on the investment side. But here's interesting. Gross investment yield 4.5, but the net investment yield is now about 1%. Right, so that basically says,
that's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course nobody ever wants to quote the net investment yield because that's after all the costs and expenses and the interest costs. But you have to look at that. So the spruiker 4.5%, but what about 1%? 1%. So you're getting if you're lucky, you're getting a 1% return on that investment. Ooh.
And if that came with significant capital growth, one might start to look at whether one might keep that investment.
Correct. But then look at
let's have a look at that. Let's go back to that median. And median is not every house price, but where there is generic property types, it often is a stronger indicator than when there's diversity in stock.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to complete the picture, if you want to look at my scenario, so I run 3 scenarios, a best case, base case and worst case scenario. This is 3 years ahead, right? So the very best case, I think, is a cumulative 1.4% in 3 years' time. Right? That's if we don't get any higher interest rates than where they currently are, which is unlikely. I think we're going to see higher rates. So we're going to be seeing somewhere between, a 1% rise and a 23% fall, but the most likely scenario is a fall over the next 2 or 3 years. So this is why investors are actually quitting, right? Because they're now saying, hang on, net investment yield ain't working, and I don't think there's any capital appreciation. So I should just get out. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing in this particular area.
Yeah, and I want to bring home that point, because I think it's illustrated quite well there if you understand the property type and the investment grade versus investor stock. And that is, they're two so vastly different things. And what we saw on the ground during COVID and the following FOMO season, if you like, the post-COVID FOMO season, was that people stopped differentiating between quality. So they started looking only for, how can I get in with what I've got and make the most just of what I've got? And they stopped differentiating between what might be investment grade with good, strong investment fundamentals that has that long-term potential for growth versus, I just need to get into anything and, okay, so it floods a little bit, but it should be okay, shouldn't happen again. Or okay, so it's a busy road, but, like there's busy roads in Sydney. So people stop differentiating between these things that are fundamentally the biggest impacts on the potential for capital growth. And one of the reasons that people one of the big reasons that people should get into property from an investment point of view isn't just about the income that's generated. It's actually about that compounding nature of capital growth and making the money work for you. And we, Veronica and I, pull the property market to pieces on an individual basis quite a bit to look at resales of individual properties. And we had a case the other day where there was 3 properties in Newcastle that sold in a 10-year period unrenovated. So really, really, really good pure data that we could work with to compare some things. And the compound growth rate over 10 years, there was about almost a 2% difference. Now, that might sound small, but one was a really good, solid investment grade property and the other 2 just weren't. So getting that wrong had made such a big difference to what that property returned to those people over time. Got about the same rent income, wasn't that much difference. Yeah. But getting the quality of it right, that's what people have got to get back to if they want to have investment grade versus just anything to get my money into the property market.
Yeah, it isn't just a case of 4 walls and the roof, it'll be fine, right? You've got to actually do it. Quite a lot. Now,
no. and if somebody, could I just point out, if somebody is getting paid by anybody but you, they're not representing your interests, so don't listen to them.
Yeah, very good point.
Rolling up, money. Putting the money, rolling up and saying, "This is great. Cup of coffee once a week. You'll be able to own this." Who's paying them? Are you paying them? No, run. Just run.
Yeah, great advice. Now, we've hit 9 o'clock. Did you want to sort of take your kiddie break and go and sort them out? Or?
No, I reckon we can push on through.
Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. That's fine. I just don't want to feel that you're locked in here.
Now, where are we up to? My goodness, we've covered a lot.
Well, we have, but there's still a bit more I'd like to cover. We'll just very quickly look at Forest Lake houses. Pretty similar story, actually. But so this is another of those sort of similar areas. But look at this, up and then down again, right? So you've got the same story, 40% rise. 40%, right?
Imagine buying there.
Yeah. So, if you bought just there, well, oh dear. Oh, yeah. Not quite so good. Now, if you bought down here, you're looking and thinking, well, that's pretty good. Maybe I've got some equity, but you're losing it quickly. And that's one of the...
on paper.
Yeah. And
unless you sold then. You sold at the top.
And that's, of course, the point. And it's something I keep coming back to. And it's really important to profit on paper is not profit. Right? You only know what your value of your property is when you actually come to transact.
Sell.
Right?
Yes.
Now, okay, you only need one buyer to buy that property, right? But all of this idea that you're somehow sitting on this well of equity, it's a theoretical well, right? And you don't know. And I have to say
completely agree.
Of all the conversations that I've had in the last 3 or 4 months, This has been one of the most difficult conversations that I've had with people, because they say, but my property's worth... No, you don't know what your property is worth. The only way you will know what your property is worth is actually to test the market and see what happens, right? Now, you can get your real estate agents to come along and say, well, the property down the street sold for that, and the other. But then are you comparing apples with pears or apples with oranges, right? And I wanted to get a little bit into this idea of comparables and how comparable are comparables, right? Because my theory is, and I think you probably would agree with me, that you can't have generic conversations about the value of property, right? You've actually got, that's a really misleading thing to go. Like Forest Lake, right? You know, 40% down. And by the way, units not quite as far down, but falling
not many
now.
Yeah, there's not a huge amount up
It's
there.
going to continue to go the same way.
Yeah.
Same story on supply, so it's going up a bit. And then the last one here, just to complete the picture, a little bit higher, 33%, right? So, and look at this, net investment yield, 0.9, so that's even worse. So you begin to see some of the DNA of what's driving decisions from people, right? But the thing I want to stress is this idea of comparables. Can we explore that a little bit more? Because I think it's probably, for me, one of the most misunderstood elements within property at the moment.
Yeah, look, we can go at it from a media down approach, I guess. And one of the things that people sometimes try and hang their hat on is if they're looking in a suburb or they have a house in a suburb, they race to the latest media report on what has been happening with median house prices, and then they try and draw comparisons between their own property or where they're looking at and what the median has done. The median is simply a set of data, and it's a middle price in a set of data for a sales period. So it number one, discount. No, don't use that one. What valuers use and real estate agents use a similar methodology is the comparable sales methodology to arrive at a market opinion. So an agent will have a market opinion. A valuer, you will have a sworn valuation. An agent cannot give you a valuation unless they are a licensed valuer. So two different things, but using the same methodology. And the methodology is looking for comparable sales. So you have a subject property. That's the property that you're looking at, not a group of properties, a single property. So we're talking about granular single level here. So a particular property, a single property, a subject property that you're trying to work out, okay, so there might be, a price guide on it. Probably won't be in Queensland because we're not allowed to give price guides unless there's a price on it. And then that should be just completely ignored anyway, because what property is worth in the market is what a willing buyer and a willing seller are prepared to agree to transact when neither are under duress. That's essentially sort of what market value is, or market opinion is, or market transaction would be. So comparable sales then form the biggest part of that assessment. So your subject property has a number of factors. There's things like the land, so the size, the contours, the elevation, the usability, the regularity of the shape of the property and so forth. That's the essence of the land component. Which side of the street it's on, what aspect does it have? Is it in the bottom of a dip or top of a hill? These sorts of things come into that kind of looking at the land, if you like. And then it's got improvements on it. So it's got a house, sheds, pool, certain bedrooms, certain layout, certain number of bathrooms, might have a deck, these sorts of things. These things are the improvements that sit on the land, fencing and all those sorts of things, solar power. These are the improvements on the land. So you've got a land aspect, you've got an improvements aspect. And when valuers and agents are looking at what has sold and comparable sales, they're looking for things that are similar to this particular subject property so that they can make comparisons about the sold properties and the price that that property sold for in relation to the subject property. Say, well, that had a superior land size. It was a larger block of land, but it had an inferior site value. It was in a bit of a dip, or it had some overland flow, or it had some flooding issues, or it got road noise. So making superior and inferior comparisons between properties that have sold and the property that you're looking at to arrive at, in essence, well, valuers will look at, say, 3 to 6 recent comparable sales in a 6-month period within about 500 metres, less than a kilometre. So, but and that's the comparable sales. They're looking for a ceiling, so a property that is as close as possible, allowing for superior and inferior aspects and comparisons, and a floor price. So one that's really close to the top, one that's really close to the bottom, and then they arrive at a price range or a price based on that. But when we've been in a market that we've been in, 6 months, sales that are 6 months old are so irrelevant and useless that the information can be misleading. And so comparable sales in a really fast increasing market or a fastly decreasing market have to be much, much more recent, and sometimes even as recent as it's gone under contract, it's unconditional, and settlement is next week. Can we use that? Or a valuer would say no, an agent would say yes, because it's the most relevant and recent information if it's unconditional. So depending on what the market is, the actual comparable sales methodology could be really quite outdated. And, of course, the information that you can get off some of the data houses for sold prices can be as much as 4 months old. Yep. And that doesn't help.
It actually misleads.
It really, if you're right, if prices are going up rapidly or going down rapidly, it works in both directions. Yep. Then you have to have much, much more recent, and you have to be so knowledgeable about those properties. Walking through, you can't just say, well, that's 3 bedrooms, that 2 bathrooms, it's got a deck and a pool, that must be the same. Because if those bedrooms in one property are 4.5 by 5 metres, good sized bedrooms, and the property that you're comparing it against has 2.8 by 2.5 bedrooms, they're not comparable. If you don't know, and if the bedrooms are the only thing that lead out to the back deck instead of the living area, it's not a practical layout, so it's not comparable. So you can actually, if you don't have the in-depth knowledge of the properties that you're actually looking at as comparable sales, then you could really get off track as well.
Absolutely. And I think the point you made about in a moving market, a fast-moving market, it is actually very difficult to try and pin the tail on the donkey, right? Because the donkey's moving around.
Yeah. You've got to index as well. So you might have comparable sales that are 4 or 5 weeks old if you can get enough data. Yep. Because remember, in a seller's market, there might not be many properties transacting because there's a lack of supply as well. Yep. So there might not be a lot of data to work with. Yep. And there's a real art in indexing during a rapidly rising or decreasing market. And that's having the knowledge to say, well, in the last 3 months, and we track this really closely as a buyer's agency in moving markets, in the last 3 months, that property we thought based on data would sell for that, but it sold for that. That one, based on data, should have sold for that, it sold for that, and you can start to see a pattern of what people are paying for premium, and then start to use indexation and apply it in a methodical way to actually say, all right, well, this property that the data that's maybe 6, 8, 7 weeks old would say that it would be worth this, but we need to index it. And this is where the indexation is sitting at the moment based on what other people are paying as a premium for a similar type property. Right. Now, that's really, really hard for the average person to do. Valuers won't do it. They'll talk about the direction of the market, but they will only use data because at the end of the day, they're valuing for a bank. And, they had some, a lot of obligations to meet and liabilities in that area. But as a buyer, you have to get that indexation right, because you'll either keep missing out because your sales data is too old and you're always under offering, or you'll just throw the kitchen sink at it because it's too hard and you don't know how to index, and you go, oh, I don't know, that sold for that. I've got this much, I'll pay that much. And, suddenly you've overpaid, and you're almost creating your own impact on the indexation in the rising market by doing that. And we did see people do that. We did see people say, I know that it's probably only worth this, but if I don't buy this, I don't know what else I'm going to do. I'm just going to throw everything at it. And that's costly in the long term, particularly as things turn against you. But I guess, Martin, what I'd also want to really make sure that people understand is that this is a manual process that you have to do yourself. Don't rely on automated valuations or property reports that give you that, you punch in an address and they say, oh, the estimate for that property is 1.35 million with, medium confidence, because that information cannot do what you need to do, and that's actually walk through the property, understand the comparable sales, understand how they relate to the subject property. It can't do all that. The algorithms, they're pretty smart and they're getting better, but they can't measure room sizes. They can't look at layouts. They can't look at is there a block of units that looks directly onto your entertaining area that will forever impact your privacy. That they can't do those things. And so you can, again, we did in Homebuyer Academy, we do a free course for property who want to work out, people who want to work out what to pay for a property. And we looked at 10 automated valuations on a property that actually sold for $740,000. The range was $299,000 from the lowest estimate on those auto vals to the highest estimate. And I think there was 2 or 3 of those auto vals where the sale price actually wasn't even within the automated valuation. One was completely over. So if you'd relied on that, you would have paid too much, and the others were completely under. So you'd never been in the game. But the data that they were using, that can be useful. If you look at the actual properties that are in there and you start to pull them apart, that might be useful information. But sometimes they're not the right properties to be making comparisons with.
Absolutely. And I think, I want to underscore again, it's really important to get your head around this, right? Because I still see people making offers and decisions based on what the property portals say it should be, right? And so that's somehow magic and, the gospel. No, it's not. No,
it's not.
It's way, way off. You could well be paying over, you could be paying under, who knows, right? And so
have a bit of fun with it. Grab a spreadsheet, have a bit of fun with it. Find 20 properties that are on the market, do some of these reports, and then actually track the sale prices. Have a laugh. It's it's sometimes quite comical, the difference between what they say you should pay versus, and look, sometimes people who are well-meaning in trying to help might point you in that direction because it gives you a piece of information, but the wrong piece of information is far more detrimental than actually educating yourself and getting that right, getting that process right.
Absolutely. And that's, you and I both believe that you can arm yourself as a prospective buyer or seller by doing a little bit more and, assembling the right information, the right philosophy, the right attitudes, right? Rather than just sort of leaning on the agent saying, well, you solve it for me, right? Because remember, the agent's there to do what? To get a sale. Any price?
To get a sale. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And we often say, and even, from a buyer's agent perspective, from an property education perspective, we say the agent isn't the enemy. Don't get the shits with them because they're not on your side. They're not meant to be on your side. They're on the seller's side. Their job is to represent that seller, to get that property sold to any buyer and to achieve the highest price that they can. So don't get cranky if they're doing their job properly. You as a buyer have to represent yourself or find someone who will, if you want to engage a buyer's agent to help you with that process, but actually arming yourself with the knowledge and the information, reliable, independent, from people who have the right meaning behind it. They're not trying to sell you something. They're not giving you information about how to buy a property and then trying to sell you a house and land package. That's not property education. That's That's spruiking. Let's call it what it is.
Yep.
But arming is, you don't know what you don't know often as a buyer. And I think that's the key is once you do know what you don't know and you fill yourself with the information, you're in a lot more control to make really good decisions, to differentiate between what is a good quality property and what's not a good quality property. How do I price this property and what should I pay? What is the process of making an offer and how do I prepare myself for an auction? All these sorts of questions, which can be quite, often you chat to your parents or your colleagues or your boss because he bought a house 10 years ago. And whilst they might have done well for themselves in their own minds, again, if they haven't sold, they don't know if they've done well or not until they sell the property. They also don't know if they sell and they think, oh, God, I did really well. Well, compared to what? What benchmark did you use to know that you did well? So well-meaning, but advice that isn't necessarily the right advice for you as an individual can take off course as well. So knowledge is power. It absolutely is. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we're close to the end of the show. If anyone's got other questions, there's time to squeeze a couple more in, but I had just one more for you, Meighan, because the other thing that I'm getting a lot at the moment are from those first-time buyers who are seeing their borrowing power squeezed, who are seeing the supply of available property dissipating, and they're seeing the rental market rocketing. They don't know what to do. And I guess my question what would you say to those first-time buyers who still aspire to get into the market in this crazy interest rate rising environment that we're in?
Yeah, look, I don't know that anyone knows when that cycle of interest rate rises will end, and I certainly you'll never hear a prediction come out of my mouth in that regard or most others. But I think again, coming back to preparedness. And this too shall end. We know, and I've worked through 8 property cycles in 20 years. So it does go up and it does go down. This too shall end. When? Don't know. What will be the outcome? Don't know. But if that is the goal, I would be saying to people, get yourself prepared. So if that preparedness is about having a really good savings plan, to get that deposit up as high as you possibly could, get onto it. Talk to the people that can help, mortgage broker, people who are experts in their lane. Build your team up, your support crew that can help you become prepared for when you are in the best position to buy. Now, you can't time the market. Nobody can time the market. You can only know when the market has changed. You'll see it in the rear vision mirror. You won't see it in front of you. There's not a big sign that says, we are going to the peak. There's no, we're going to bottom out. It's always, there it goes. Can see some signs, certainly, but, nobody can call the top or the bottom of the market. I've seen people call the top and the bottom of the market and then it's kept going in the same direction. So preparedness, I think, is the key. We were talking about it earlier, Martin. Luck is when opportunity meets preparedness. So as a first home buyer, if you educate yourself and there's, let me say outright, Veronica and I have a course for first home buyers. We put a huge amount of time and effort and passion into this. If you prepare yourself and conditions come in your favour, now don't wait for the market to fall significantly. It's just not going to happen. But when things are right for you to buy and you've prepared yourself and the opportunity is there and you're seeking the opportunity, then you'll know when the right opportunity is actually there and you can move on it rather than saying, oh my God, this is, it's awful. I don't know. I'm going to wait until prices fall. I'll never be able to buy. I'll be renting forever. Well, you can have that, that sort of attitude, or you can say, all right, do you know what? I know things are going to change at some point in time. I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to be ready. I'm going to know what I need to do when I'm going to need to do it. I'm going to be, quite disciplined about how I save to get myself in the best position to have. And it's all sorts of really interesting things that people, first home buyers, tell us that they do to accelerate their savings process. So getting all of those things lined up mean that when the opportunity is there, and it might be that a property comes across falls into your lap, probably not, but something comes up and you go, I've always liked that house, or I've always liked that street, or I've always wanted to live in that suburb, and the opportunity's there, and you know exactly what you need to do when you need to do it, and you can actually move probably quicker than everybody else can, and with a large amount of control, so that you make a really good decision and come out the other side going, I was ready, I was comfortable, I know that I made the right decision, and I now have that home that I've been looking for. I'm now a homeowner. So during this period, and a lot of people did this during COVID, they went, I'm going to prepare myself for when the opportunity is there for me to actually get active as a buyer, but I'm going to be ready to hit the ground running. And I absolutely applaud those people that did that during that period of time, because they were ready, and they got in when things allowed them to, and made their decisions and made their purchases with a lot of control and a lot of comfort, rather than feeling like, I'm going to do it because everyone else is doing it now.
That's right. Follow the crowd. Be a lemming. No, don't be a lemming. Don't
be a sheep.
No, exactly. Now, Cookie Boy.
But it's when the essence is when you're ready to buy is the best time to buy, not when the market or the media is telling you that it's time to buy.
Yeah, lay the foundations and know what you need to be watching, looking for the signs, and be prepared. And then, at the right time, you'll know when it's the right time.
Yeah.
And don't, as you say, just follow the crowd. The number of people.
Don't wait for the sign.
No, the number one conversation I get with my first-time buyers. I was at the barbecue and all my friends have all bought. I haven't bought. I feel I'm missing out. And that might
maybe it's not. Maybe you're not ready yet.
Exactly.
And that's okay. Yeah.
Now, quick question. What's your view of the Gold Coast from Mike? I don't know whether you've got any observation there. I'm seeing some falls in some units, particularly in the Gold Coast at the moment, and some houses also.
So Gold Coast is a little bit similar to what we talked about. I'm going to talk about two different things there, because Mike asked about a specific suburb. So I'll speak generally about the Gold Coast. Gold Coast can be quite lumpy. And what we see is that Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast often have big runs of interest when there's a lot of interest in Brisbane, or there's a lot of disposable income. So Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast have had brilliant runs in terms of the demand for very limited supply, talking about houses first. And that has really pushed quite significant growth into those areas in terms of price. And but what happens when the heat comes out of those markets is a little bit like what you saw with Forest Lake and Springfield Lakes, is those prices can do the dip. And they can dip, not necessarily back to previous levels, but the dip can be, pretty strong. So they're not that kind of steady growth. They are very lumpy, and they're very much based on people's disposable income, because a lot of them are based on people having a second residence. And that was a big part of what we saw in pushing up prices, particularly during COVID, was people wanting a second residence in a lovely place, or a sea change relocation. So that's one part. The other part, the question was particularly around Coomera, and Coomera is between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. So it's in that infill sort of area. And many years ago, and even now, I think, those areas can be called growth corridors. And what you need to be, forewarned is forearmed, and knowledge is power. Growth corridor is about an increase in the number of properties, not an increase in and bringing population to them, not an increase in growth of property prices. Those areas, there's large tracts of land, there's large holdings through there that the developers have that have still yet to be released. So if you go back to the fundamentals of what we talked about with Springfield Lakes and North Lakes, really similar to Coomera, Upper Pimpama, all those sorts of area in that infill area between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, there isn't anything that would tell me that there's long-term capital growth prospects there, because there is still large amounts of land to be released, and a lot of the properties are quite similar. They are often built for first-time buyers and for investors, not necessarily a large buyer pool.
Absolutely. I think those lake examples object lesson for a lot of other areas too. I think that's a very important point. Now, John asked about 4520. I just want to put that one up. I don't have it here. So 4520 is Mount Sampson. So it's in the Brisbane and Moreton area. Interesting observation there is that the stress levels are quite high, mortgage stress in particular. But look at this, 37.2% is the average disposable monthly income. So remember what I said about disposable income? So it's a lot higher.
How to work out where it is?
It's including
Sensordale, Cedar Creek.
Cedar Creek, Camp Mountain, Stamford, that sort of area.
Yep.
97% houses. But look at these scenarios. Because of these stress levels, the downside risk is significant here in this particular area. And then just looking at the investment yields, 1.6%, so slightly better. But this disposable monthly income thing, that's a really important metric, right? And of all the things that I've done over the last year or so as I built my models out, I found this disposable income is a really, really good proxy for potential issues, particularly now with interest rates rising. So that's one of those factors to watch there. So I think we can conclude from our conversation tonight that, boy, it's complicated, right? We are in a state...
It is. We're in a funny market.
We're in a funny market, a state of flux, but there are things that people can do to equip themselves to navigate whatever the rapids are ahead. What you want to do is make sure that you're in command of your own destiny rather than actually putting your trust.
Sail your own ship.
Exactly.
Walk at your own pace, but be prepared. And I think that's the thing I keep saying to people is this concept of luck. Really, it's people who take an opportunity, but they're ready for it. So, can you be lucky in property? Yeah, of course you can. Can absolutely snag what you think is a bargain, but really it's unusual and you shouldn't rely on that as a strategy. But arming yourself with information, learning what you don't know and what you don't know that you don't know, learning about that and being prepared will actually, I think, in this market is one of the most important times to have everything lined up and ready to go, because we don't know when it's going to change. Interest rates could stop rising in 2 months and boom, those 1,000 people that were going to those open houses with those 100 agents, they may all put pressure on the market in one hit. So to be ready for that, you can't pick when that's going to happen, but you can be ready, and you can be ready to move when the opportunity is there, when the right property is there, and when you're ready financially to move forward with it. And that education and that being in control of your pathways means that someone can't take you off. An agent can't take you down a path of, you need to pay this, don't worry about what anyone else. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're in control and you have the information, you're able to push back and say, no, I'm really comfortable with what I'm doing here. I'm going to push forward at this level, and I'm going to push myself for this property only. But geez, I'm not going to push myself for that one over there because it's sub-quality, it's sub-grade, and I know it's not worth anywhere near that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time tonight. If people want to find out more about you and your services, where should they go?
Probably the first home buyers, get on to homebuyeracademy.com.au. There's a whole heap of free resources there as well as the course. And anyone looking for a property in Brisbane, if you're looking for some help from a buyer's agent, it's propertypursuit.com.au.
Terrific. Meighan, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Meighan. I love chatting with you about Brisbane property because we always go wider and deeper and philosophic. I love it. So thank you very much. We'll do it again sometime down the track. That's and next time we chat, I'm sure the market will be different shaped again. Thank you so much.
What we should do is pull out little bits from previous episodes and go, what did Meighan say? She said it was a funny market. Oh, she said it was a funny market.
Yeah, there are some common themes, aren't there? Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll take you off stream and I'll finish the show. Take care. Thank you. Bye. So there you go. Very interesting conversation. Meighan's always great value. And just to say that next week we're going to talk about the financial markets with Damien Klassen, and obviously a lot going on there too. So mark your diary for that. And quick visit to the dogs. Still there, still sound asleep. So they've been enjoying the show in the only way that they know how, which is snoozing. So I want to say thank you very much for sharing your Tuesdays in with us. Hope you found that useful. Join us next week for another live show and catch up during the week for the recorded shows. And I'll look forward to having a conversation with Damien next week about the markets. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. Cheerio. Good night.